Oh
Boom.
boy.
Ooh,
All right.
Discord
we're
is
live.
live.
Yes, we are with our fifth annual UWFSA live stream. It's not annual, but it
annual?
sounds more official when you say that it is our fifth annual. We've been doing this for a long time, guys, I swear. So this is
5 years now, eh?
our fifth weekly one.
I
My
like
name's Thank you. My name's Mark Demain. I'm the president of the Windsor Free Speech Association, and I'm going to be moderating this discussion, both about the current state of the United Nations and more broadly the concept of a global governance and how that applies to the world as we know it today. So we'll start with introductions about ourselves and about our stance on the topic. When I say the topic, I mean just global governments for now. We'll get more specifically into the United Nations later. So, Alan, we'll start with you.
All right, my name is Alan, and when I was a kid, I really liked United Nations, but now since I'm growing up, I mean, I'm starting to see that it's like they started off with good intentions, but it's not really working out.
Now, what about the idea of global governance in general? Are you opposed to that, or do you just think that the UN as a global governing body could be doing better?
I mean, they could be doing better.
Okay. Khaled, you're up next.
Hi, my name is Khaled. I'm an addict.
Hello.
No, for real. I'm Khaled. And I stand in the position of where I like the idea of a global coalition. I think it's important for things like democratic peace, the democratic peace, economic unities, trade, all that kind of stuff.
Uh-huh.
But I don't like the UN as an organization. I think the UN as an organization have overstepped their boundaries and, really need to, they need to change structurally and they need to back off a little bit.
Okie dokie. Zin.
I am not a big fan of the UN at all, or globalism in general. I'm very much against globalism. As for the UN itself, I used to be all for them until I saw Anita Sarkeesian and Zoe Quinn giving this speech about how we should censor the internet because somebody told them they sucked, and that was when I stopped taking them seriously at all.
That's pretty, honestly, I think the Anita Sarkeesian era was when I started to pay attention to all this stuff myself, but
yeah.
Sadly, my stance on the UN is not as educated as it would be. I'll admit that right off the bat.
No,
but,
we're not really educated.
Mm-hmm. No, we're going to be getting...
Not until we graduate.
We're going to be getting another member to the discussion a little bit later. Her name's Katrina, and she's actually the first-year political science representative for poli-sci at the University of Windsor. Yeah, I know she's very pro-UN, and she knows her stuff when it comes to the topic, so that should be interesting as well, to engage with her. I don't want it to be a 4v1, but I feel like she's more equipped to dismantle the four of us by herself. So we'll start.
Science representative for poli-sci.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I don't see nothing wrong with that, Khaled.
The first-year political science representative for political science.
Yes, of course. Oh. Well, we're not discussing my grammar, Khaled. We'll start with the idea of global governance in general, because what it started off as is something that I actually support. I'm referring to back when Woodrow Wilson was president of the United States. This was from 1912 to 1918 and supported the idea of a global League of Nations. However, this League of Nations would only include countries that were democratic in nature, so republics for the most part. So countries like, say, Saudi Arabia or pretty much any country in the Middle East except for Israel right now would not be allowed to join the United Nations or the League of Nations as it was intended. And the purpose of the League of Nations would have been to promote democracy globally. That's not entirely what the UN is right now. The ideas changed radically and showed that Woodrow Wilson wasn't able to accomplish as much as he'd wanted to with his League of Nations idea. But hypothetically, would you support the idea of this version of a global governing body in the form of the League of Nations?
Well, okay. I'd be more in support of it than the current model of the UN, but I'd go for some more changes.
Like what?
Okay, well, first of all, I would want to go farther than just democracy. I would like to essentially focus on countries that promote Western values. Mm-hmm. I think if they formed a coalition to really defend each other, to properly institute trade with each other, and to properly And even then, you could move on and extend to other countries if you want to promote these ideas through things like certain trade deals or, military agreements, all that kind of stuff. So really, I guess the only real major difference is that I'd go a little bit farther than just democracy, and I would want countries that mainly promote Western values there.
So you would want, I see the idea is a bit contradictory with what you're proposing, is a global governing body that promotes the values of one of the regions, which, I mean, I know there's a lot of good stuff that's come from the West, that's come from Canada and the United States, but there is such a thing as, distinct cultural values in places like Asia or in India where...
No, there definitely are, and I'm not asking for other cultures to turn over. It's just, I think a lot of cultures do have a lot that they need to learn, and that they need to, essentially, trade in, the aspects that don't work within their own cultures for aspects that do work.
Okay, let's work on that then. Let's define what you mean by Western values first, and what you don't mean by Western values.
All right, what I essentially mean by Western values is classical Enlightenment values, basically.
Mm-hmm. So let's say a central part of that theme would have been Christianity, right? The Roman Catholic Church would have been a much stronger entity at the time, as I understand it. Correct me if I'm wrong, because my knowledge is not the greatest in this field.
Yeah, at the time, yes, they were stronger, yes.
So, okay, so obviously you wouldn't be promoting the global indoctrination of Christianity worldwide, but more the values that we as a society have taken from that.
Well, you can have the values without the faith itself, right?
Okay. I haven't heard from Alan or Zin yet.
Faith, so
I'm listening.
All this kind of shifting to this direction.
I'm just lurking.
I wish I could do that. But the idea of a global governing body specifically for the purpose of promoting democracy, or rather the second purpose of it under Woodrow Wilson would have been more specifically to stopping all war, which, I mean, kind of the UN has done a good job of doing that, because aside from the Cold War, after World War II, when the UN was founded, we haven't had any global war since then.
Okay, but here's a real question. Did we have no real wars because of the UN, or did we have no real wars due to the events of World War II?
I mean, nobody wants to go into global war because nukes are bad.
Nukes are actually very good.
Well, we haven't had any mass-scale wars like we've seen in World War I and World War II for any reason of that, right? And it's been hypothesized by a lot of people that if Woodrow Wilson was successful with the League of Nations, that it would have prevented World War II. That was one of the main intentions of the League of Nations, was to prevent future catastrophes like what happened in World War I. But he didn't succeed, and we still had World War II because of that. Do you think maybe this governing body, this League of Nations, could have prevented World War II? If you think that the lack of this global war was caused because of the events of World War II. You know what I'm trying to get at?
I'm gonna say, well, it would depend, because with this League of Nations, would they add the same punishments and sanctions and penalties to Germany? Well, because ultimately, what caused the Nazi Germany to rise is a lot of the sanctions and really punishments they were given.
Germany hypothetically would have been invited.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Oh.
Like what happened was, like, if you're fighting a war, then and you win, you can't make the loser bear all the brunt. I mean, like, that's being too selfish. If they didn't make Germany bear all the brunt, then there wouldn't have been a World War II.
Well, there's two sides to that.
Remember, the Nazi Party was formed as a reactionary party.
A lot of people accepted the Nazi ideology because most of them were like dirt poor, and they had this like Nazi thing, which like, it's like if you stick with them, like you won't go hungry, or so, like that was like one of the main reason. Like, if I'm telling you, if Germany was in a good economic situation, the Nazi party would not have been able to grow so fast or like become dominant. It's because they were poor and desperate. They were like they just had to they just accepted anything which like seemed this false hope or whatever.
Well, no, I don't think it's accepted anything that seems false hope. I think it's mostly because they were in such a disadvantaged position after World War II. And generally speaking, when people have their backs against the wall, they'll go for a solution, and this was really to them the most viable solution at the time. So really, it's completely reactionary, and because of this, it's not. I mean, what I'm saying is that I guess that it's yes, it came from a bit of a position of desperation, but I think I don't know where I was going with this. I'm not in it.
I have two things to add actually. Well, there's been two sort of main theories. One of them was that preceding or during World War I, one of the main slogans that took place in the United States at the time was peace without victory, right? Meaning that a total annihilation from one side of the war or the other would never lead to a lasting peace because it would instill a rivalry between the two. He wanted a dissolution of the war and the agreement to join a League of Nations on both sides, from both Britain and from Germany. But of course,
I think someone joined.
Yeah, I'll get to you in a second. I'll just finish my point first. So that's what Woodrow Wilson wanted to do. Is he didn't want victory for either side of the war. He wanted more of a peace agreement between them, and with the condition that the League of Nations was to be formed and both of them were to join. And then the other, what actually happened was the Treaty of Versailles, after Germany was inevitably the one that was defeated in the war. And many have said that it was the lack of enforcement of the Treaty of Versailles that led to the rise of that country at the time. I more go on the Woodrow Wilson side of that, saying that peace without victory is the only way to abstain from this peace, right? We saw that in the Cold War when basically the Soviet Union self-destructed and there was no one victor dominating the other. Right, but we have a new person here. Millennial? Is it just millennial? I don't know who that is.
Oh, clearly a millennial.
Oh, why don't you introduce yourself?
Obvious.
Yeah, why don't you introduce yourself?
Is my audio on?
Now it is.
Okay. I guess I'm on the wrong account, but whatever. It's Maggie.
Oh, it sounds like Maggie, yeah.
Yeah, it is Maggie. Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to make 100% certain. All right, we're talking more broadly about just the idea of a global governing body in general, not so much the UN for now. I brought up the League of Nations idea, which is fundamentally different from the UN that we have now, and that it's about only democracies would be allowed to join the League of Nations for one, and it was for the purpose of promoting democracy throughout the world, which is not... I'm going to say that you're not in favor of that idea.
Well, if you read the whole thing that comes up, this Google account is actually millennial monarchist. Democracy is trash.
But you live in one.
Yeah. And have you seen our leader?
Well, democracy does have its set of flaws. I don't think you can have an actual pure democracy. There needs to be a lot of checks and balances for a democratic system to actually work. I think, at least.
No.
Well, this ain't a debate about democracy.
Even aside from democracy just being total trash, which it is, the idea that it's the US's job specifically to anglicize, Christianize, and democratize led to massive conflict in the Middle East when they destabilized their monarchist regimes.
Hold on, I think we just jumped 20 sharks. You lost me there halfway through this.
Yeah, I'm totally lost.
Okay. The US went into the Middle East, right?
Yes.
We're all good? And the Middle East had a whole bunch of monarchies, and the US went, but democracy's so much better, we're gonna force a democracy on you. And then shit went down. And
I mean, the monarchies in the Middle East weren't exactly very good to begin with.
And the democracies managed to be even worse.
Well, right now they're not really democracies. They're just more of conflicting sides. Well, a lot of them are countries that really shouldn't have been together to begin with. Like a lot of these, and even then, were they all monarchies? Because I know Iraq wasn't a monarchy. Syria wasn't a monarchy. Egypt did, well, it wasn't a monarchy for a while. They were all dictatorships, pretty much. Not
but
really.
Specifically, if we're looking at Iran, Iran's a great example.
Oh, yeah, but it's really the only example of a monarchy.
Hold on. Let's recenter the conversation for a little while. We're getting a little off topic here. Maggie, I know I asked you a little earlier about the idea of a global governing body for the specific purpose of promoting democracy throughout the world. Obviously, you're opposed to that idea if you're opposed to democracy. Let's recenter it about the UN specifically. Do you support their existence? If so, why? If not, why? And what could they be doing better than they are now?
I mean, Saudi Arabia is on the Women's Rights Council. So,
But yeah, under the League of
UN
Nations.
We it is big to women, okay?
Well, under the League of Nations idea.
Islamically is the right way.
Yeah. Because Saudi Arabia is not a democracy, they technically wouldn't have been allowed to join Woodrow Wilson's League of Nations, but here they are on the United Nations, serving much of the same purpose that the United Nations claims to be doing. So it's two different, incredibly different theories towards a similar outcome. I would think one of them has to be right, or one of them has to be better, I would think.
But Woodrow's idea is definitely better than the current UN, that's for sure.
They're both fundamentally flawed, I'd say. The UN has this idea of just en masse globalism, a bunch of elites telling people what their moral values should be, when they themselves are morally corrupt. So that's great.
Sorry, you can finish and then I'll
I was just gonna say, and then the League of Nations is just a shill for democracy, and who wants that?
There's a lot of theories that have gone aboard that said that had Woodrow Wilson been successful in the implementation of the League of Nations, that it would have prevented the Second World War, because that was the second main cause of the League of Nations, was a peace without victory, meaning that neither Britain nor Germany would be the definitive victor of World War I, and it would have been an agreed-upon peace treaty to prevent future conflicts of that nature. So preventing war and the spread of democracy was the main two focuses of the League of Nations. Could it prevented World War II had he been successful?
I don't think so.
Why not?
One, Germany was just dealing with essentially a brand new government through democracy instead of the Kaiser.
Yes. Sorry.
And so Germany was inherently unstable in that sense.
It went through, I think, this was in my comparative politics classes, I think it went through at least 6 regime changes throughout the course of its history.
Yeah. Something like that. I don't know the exact number. But they just lost the Kaiser, essentially. Which is a massive blow to Germany. And that fundamentally destabilized them, which led to World War II in the sense that it gave an opening to a severely corrupt democracy to come in promising to give people money. Which is what all democracies do. It's just they promise different amounts at different times.
Okay. On that note, though, if the UN does at least claims to do much of the same thing, which was formed after World War II in 1948. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure that's the right date.
Yeah, no, you're right.
1948 UN comes around, and unless you want to count the Cold War, and the Cold War, in terms of destructive capabilities, obviously has nothing compared to World War I and World War II. We haven't seen any mass-scale war like that since the formation of this governing body, the United Nations. Does that have something to do with it? Or there's another theory that also says that democracies generally tend to never go to war with each other, at least not in terms of armed conflict.
One second.
Okie dokie.
Yeah. If you Google right now, Internet Explorer correlation, you will see that Internet Explorer use matches up almost exactly with the murder rate in the US. Correlation does not equal causation, and we need to look at other factors at the time. Is that the UN hasn't prevented war. I mean, what are peacekeepers going being, yep, that's a war. Yep, that's preventing it. No, it's, like was said earlier in the stream, the development of nuclear weapons, the idea of mutually assured destruction, is more what is keeping peace than anything else.
Well, pretty much exactly everything you said. And I also want to add to that, the aftermath of World War II itself could have very well, quite simply, I guess you could say, caused the idea that maybe we shouldn't go to war as much anymore. Like, the aftermath of World War II, it was pretty big. It was huge. So I don't know if the UN really should be given the credit for not for preventing any bigger wars.
Plus, even as a cultural side, if we look at the Vietnam War and the protests that happened over the Vietnam War, one, photography has had a huge impact on our view of war and what we think is okay. As well as baby boomers have been in charge for a long time now. And baby boomers do not like mass-scale war for a good reason, but it's very culturally ingrained into their youth to be very anti-war.
Mm-hmm. Well, in comparison with baby boomers to millennials, a lot of people say that millennials now live in this oasis of freedom that was brought from these wars, but because they're not old enough to remember the destructive effects of them, don't have an appreciation for the people that, for the fighting that we had to do in those wars to preserve this freedom, right?
I actually completely agree with this. I think millennials, and I see this a lot, especially someone who, isn't from here, who really wasn't too familiar with this freedom. People really do take the freedom here for granted. People do take their countries for granted, and people do take, the privileges and rights they have for granted. Mm-hmm. So I do think it is a matter of being in peace for so long that they kind of just forgot. Mm-hmm. They got too comfortable where they are now, I guess, is what I'm saying. Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, it makes sense, both in theory and in practice, is how we can have a deeper appreciation for, the privileges that we really do have here if we don't have any recollection of the hardships that we had to go through in order to get them to where we are right now.
No, exactly.
Oh, but we're getting off topic again, though. I'm sorry, my problem is I don't have a whole lot to say about the UN. I was hoping that we could sort of shoestring off of more knowledgeable people on the topic. I was kind of hoping.
Well, I think Kat will be here soon. Mm-hmm. Something that she'll probably very, very, very much disagree with me on.
Oh yeah, I already know that she does.
But yeah, I mean, I think the most fundamental problem with the UN is exemplified in Saudi Arabia on the Women's Rights Council.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, going by. Sorry, you can finish.
I was just gonna say it's ineffective. It doesn't have a real purpose, and it's just for showboating.
Now, under Woodrow Wilson's League of Nations idea, only democracies would have been allowed to join. So Saudi Arabia would not be allowed to be on the Women's Rights Council. Wouldn't be allowed to be in the League of Nations under any circumstances at all.
And Canada and Britain, India, Australia.
They're democracies. They'd be in there, yeah.
They're constitutional monarchies.
India's a democracy.
Actually, India might be fully.
Well, they have a democratic governmental structure.
Yeah, they have democratic governments, though.
Okay, so it's not a democracy, because even the U.S. isn't a democracy. The U.S. is a
republic. That's the official.
But when I say democracy, I'm not talking about in its truest form at its roots. I'm talking about governmental structure characterized by freedom of the people, freedom of the press, freedom of vote, opinion expression, all the rights that are generally associated with Western valued democratic states like the United States.
You can have those in a monarchy. They're not exclusive to democracy.
Monarchy is a scam.
Really?
Yeah.
Democracy is the biggest scam I can think of.
Some lucky dickhead is born in a freaking family and he gets to rule. Like, whoa.
Yeah, a monarch is raised from birth. Alan, a monarch is raised from birth to know how to rule a country. You think Justin Trudeau knows jack shit about ruling a country? He was a drama teacher.
See, like, the thing with monarchy is the king, if he's a good king, it's better than a democracy, but if he's a bad king, a democracy is better than a monarchy.
But
the issue with the monarchy, right, is that, the future of the country is totally, sealed upon, what one person thinks should be right for the country. Like 100% of that future is, kind of, it has itself set on one person's, essentially one person's destiny. I think that's the big issue here, that it's too much power. First of all, it's too much power for one person. Secondly,
too much power for one person.
Secondly, it literally leaves everybody hanging on the hands of fate. And thirdly, it's how do I put this? You are there is concern for potential overuse of state power with a monarchy. So,
Yep.
and even then, a monarchy is only really good if you agree with its values.
Like, for example, Queen Elizabeth, she can kill someone and she does not have to tell anyone why she killed that person, and she cannot be charged with murder or whatever. Like, it's like saying, hey, look, the law applies for you all, but it does not apply to Queen Elizabeth. You get what I'm saying? Like, she can take land from anyone she wants to, and she does not even
owns
have
all the
to pay
land.
that person.
Like, it's not she's taking the people that she owns the land.
No, it's like anyone, any land in UK, if she likes it, she can just take it. She doesn't even have to buy it.
I mean,
She
any
owns
land in
it
the
already.
Right to just
is
take
owned
it.
by the royal family, though.
What?
The land in the UK is owned by the royal family, so.
Yeah, so like someone pays money to buy a house, and then the queen, like, if she just takes it, that's not fair. She should not be even given that option.
That's not how land works, though. Like, in Canada, you can have your house foreclosed on. Because the government, at any point, if you look at Indian Road, they can just be like, "Kate, you need to sell your house." That's how life works. You never actually really own land.
I like
Oh,
that.
sorry. I was waiting to see if Alan had a response to that there. What was the original question of that? Because that got way sidetracked from what it was intended to be. Democracy versus monarchy.
I like democracy because it gives every average Joe a freaking shot at.
Okay, now I have a question for you, Alan.
Comment.
Okay, I have a question, Alan. Why is every average Joe entitled to select a political leader, and is every average Joe capable of making the right choices for the country?
No, I mean, like, it's like democracy is like competition. Competition is good. Monarchy
Okay,
is like
Alan.
competition. It's like this dude is gonna become king or queen regardless.
Well, first of all,
you
you're
have to put in effort to be the best.
okay.
Yeah,
No, it's
Alan.
not okay. Alan, you're okay. I'm against monarchies, but then I also think democracies are flawed. Refuting back to monarchies doesn't really answer any of my questions. So, yeah, tell me why should every Joe have a say? And two, is every Joe actually capable and informed enough to have a proper, say of things?
See, that's the one thing I don't that really grinds my gears about democracy is that a stupid man's vote is worth just as much as a smart man's vote.
Well, see, that's the big
the
problem.
one thing.
The vote of some minimum wage worker or even an unemployed person who contributes nothing to the economy is as valued as the vote of a landowning business owner.
Yeah,
Well,
Alan.
I mean, if you want a government that's where only a handful of elites make all of the executive decisions in the country in regards to government, I suggest you just move to China because that's exactly how they do that there.
Hey, who's actually promoting that? I'm a little lost.
No one's promoting Chinese communism. Actually, my prof is, but that's a different story.
And besides, I don't think it's about having the elites in control. Like, the way I see it, voting, it should, votes. The weight of one's vote shouldn't be equal to the weight of another's vote because, simply put, some people are much more well informed and well educated than others. Some people have contributed a lot more than others. Some people actually know their shit in comparison to others.
Yeah, Alan.
Yo, well, if you do that, if that comes into play, then it'll become what's that? It'll become like, you're oppressing the poor people. It'll start looking like that.
Who gives a shit?
I mean,
But
look, they're gonna cry. I'm oppressed anyway.
Okay.
No, the thing is, you gotta look
Alan,
good.
let me get a
I
word
mean,
in
not
edgewise.
every good decision looks good. I think sometimes you're gonna have to make some ugly decisions for the sake of a country's long-term longevity.
Okay, Alan, listen to me. Let's say Khaled and I are both running for something. Khaled
Okay.
promises to give you $5. I promise to give you $6. Who are you voting for?
Neither of you. What are you standing for?
Khaled is standing on giving you $5. I'm standing on giving you $6.
But what are you gonna do? Like once you get into power, that's what matters. I don't care what you give me.
Then you are not the average voter, because most average voters go, "Ooh, I want $6, so I'm gonna vote for Maggie." Then Maggie wins, even though she only has $4 to give away. That's the fundamental problem of democracy.
Well, we should educate them. We can't tell them, hey, you're not good enough to vote. Like, then educate them and make them good enough to vote. That's your job as the
Or just
government.
still not voting, because
The government's job isn't to teach people how to vote. It's to basically to a couple things. One, protect individual rights within the country of their own citizens, and number two, it's to ensure, I guess you could say, how do I put this? To ensure that, well, essentially to hold together a court system to make sure laws are being upheld. I think those are the two major roles of the government. I think education as the role of the federal government. The federal government should not be involved in education. And I think the whole idea that the government's role is to educate people is
just allows for abuse.
and that's another thing. You're talking about the government educating people. That puts people in the exact same problem as giving a government too much power, because then suddenly you're giving government full control of what the education system is going to look like. So you're not going to be learning people the proper way. You're not going to be teaching people the right ways how to vote. Instead, you're going to be teaching people, that they should vote for a specific set of things.
Yeah, do you think that communism's actually a good thing, and that's why it's so popular? Or is it because a couple communists got into teaching positions and created more communists?
Wait, are you asking me?
Well, it's a rhetorical question because the answer is obvious.
I don't. If you're being honest here, I don't like communism.
No one should. But we have
So
a
many people who do.
Canada-wide dilemma of communists everywhere, and it's quite frankly disgusting.
Communism
It's
is.
a campus-wide dilemma, but I think the threat of actual communist regime coming into Canada is far-fetched and
No,
ridiculous.
I meant across Canada, not a threat towards Canada.
I mean, across university campuses, perhaps, but
Yeah.
Externally or internally. There's
I
an
mean,
actual
then again, a lot of
communist
these
party
people
in
just
Canada
find
that's
it-
been here for decades. Heavy socialist platforms and communist platforms have always been here, and they've always been kind of small. They've gained traction among the millennial forces today for whatever reasons, but to say that there's an actual threat of it externally or internally in the United States, Canada, or anywhere that isn't communist right now, I think is very far-fetched.
No, yeah, you're right. I did misspeak. I meant more along the lines of there is an issue with communists across Canada.
No, look.
No matter where you are in Canada, you'll find stupid communists.
Okay.
Going on that, one person promises you $5 and the other person promises you $6. It reminisced me a little bit of when Stephen Harper was first getting into power, where there was a dispute on childcare at the time, right? And the Liberal government that was in power wanted to take tax money, and they wanted to use the tax money to fund new daycare centers. And then the Stephen Harper government said, well, I'm just going to let you keep more of your tax money, and parents know best how to invest that money for their kids. And ultimately, who do you think is better suited to spend that money? Government to put it into the childcare system to fund new daycare clinics, basically, or parents who can invest it in their own kids in their own ways.
I mean,
Which of those promises seems better to you?
No, wait. Like, of all the parents in Canada, what's the proportion of responsible parents?
Does it matter?
Yeah, because
A little bit, because those are the parents that are going to go out and vote for the conservative plan.
No, if you have like a 95% of responsible parents, then the conservative idea is better. But if you have like a 10% of responsible parents and 90% irresponsible parents, and it's better to put the money in the
Except
child's
no,
care.
because that puts the government directly in charge of educating small children instead of their parents.
Yeah, 'cause
And
the parents are fucking
this
idiots.
isn't
Well,
an
not,
it
not
wasn't
only
an
that, is that
education plan.
it's also not going to really teach anyone actual responsibility. It's not going to teach anyone to be responsible with their children. Instead, all it's going to do is going to create more dependency to the state.
Maybe we should refine. It wasn't an educational plan. It was just government-funded daycare centers. It's not the same thing.
well, you're taking government-funded daycares. If you look over in Scandinavian countries where they exist, they are mandatory. They're treated just like school. And at like 2 years old, you basically have to give your kid away all day, regardless of whether you work or not.
I mean,
And
you
the
can't
government is in
force
charge
them.
of raising your children. And if
You
you
can't
don't think
force-
that's terrifying,
Well,
you don't
in that
take
case-
government.
The Harper plan won in that case, right? Because, I mean, even though it was a minority government, he still came into power, and partly due to that plan, right? And that's the plan that went into effect. Okay.
Oh, yeah, I'm just countering Alan right now, because Alan's saying if people are stupid, it's okay to take their kids away.
Yeah, the parents will freaking be a bad influence on them.
And the government can be a bad influence as well.
The government's the worst one.
Well, I mean, we got the CAS Institute in Canada for that kind of stuff already, to take kids away from toxic parents and put them out for foster homes. But
Yeah, and the new leader of the Ontario PC party voted for CIS to have the power to take your kids away
Wait,
if you
new
don't
leader?
believe in gay rights.
there's a new leader of the PCs already. I thought that vote
Interim.
wasn't. I thought that vote wasn't supposed to happen until March.
He's an interim.
Yeah, I think people are still running. I know that Doug Ford is.
Yeah,
but
interim leader. He's not permanent,
Okay, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
but he, on his voting record, he has voted to take kids away from their parents if they don't believe in different gender identities. Regardless if the kid suffers from gender dysphoria or not, just if your parents actively don't believe in it, this guy voted for the government to be able to take your kids away.
This guy a fucking retard? What the fuck?
Alan, you essentially just said you wanted the same thing.
Hey, no one's fucking taking my kids away and shit. I'll fucking punch that asshole. I mean, I get kids in the future.
What if the
Yeah.
government determines that you are an irresponsible parent, though, Alan? Then it's their rightful duty to force your kids into daycare and take them away from you. Or
But
we can get the government the hell out. Seriously,
I
you're
mean,
turning me into more of a conservative than I am.
If you have kids like who get beaten up by drunk parents for no reason, then the government should step in. But you can't force the
Yeah, but there's already a system for that, and
that you want.
Publicly funded daycare isn't a solution to this, though.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, daycare.
There are already systems and programs in place for this.
Yeah, I know, like foster homes and shit.
Well, no, I was bringing up the point just to illustrate that there's different ways that governments can decide to utilize the same money that appeals to different people in different ways, whether that's to be in regards to children to let the parents decide whatever to do with the money. But obviously the contrast to that is abusive parents can choose to use the money irresponsibly, or do you let the government invest that money
Invest.
into,
You have
into,
abusive parents,
into the
daycare,
government
yeah,
approved
daycare.
daycare centers, right?
There has never been a more true phrase uttered than the scariest thing to say is I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Agreed.
Apply that to global governments. I'm from the UN, and I'm here to help. The government that helps out other governments.
Oh boy.
The government who stands there and points and goes, that's bad. You can't do anything about it, but we'll label it as bad. And we'll target Israel more than any other country.
I actually wanted to bring that up because that's one small area about the UN that I do know about, and how the sanctions that they have against Israel far exceed even the ones they have against Iran by more than 3 times the amount.
Well, and another thing is that talking about the UN, there are more human rights resolutions against Israel than there are against Saudi Arabia.
And Saudi Arabia. Israel is Israel in part of the UN in any way? I'm not
There are
sure.
against Saudi Arabia.
Is Israel a member of the UN in any way?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. I wasn't sure if they were or not. I think like 194 countries in the world are part of the UN right now. I'm not sure which countries are not. I know North Korea isn't. That's for sure.
There's some Eastern European country called Kosovo. That's not part of the UN. Kosovo or Kosovo, whatever.
I don't know. I think this unknown European country may be a
Vatican
step ahead of the
City
curve.
isn't.
Vatican City. Is that?
It's its own country.
It's its own country, but I mean, like, does that count? I don't,
Yes, it does.
okay.
But is it in the
Where my
UN?
heart lives.
I mean, they get
That's
everything
the
from
Vatican
Islam.
flag.
Oh, where did this like, I'm not gonna say, oh, are they biased against Israel or is it warranted? Because I mean, even for the people who are kind of more sketchy about Israel or more on the Palestinian side of that argument, I think even still trying to compare Israel to a place like Iran is absurd. It's just outright absurd. So where did this bias against Israel come from? Because if you remember back in 1948, it was the UN that actually was the one that voted in support of legitimizing Israel as its own country in the Middle East. So where did this bias come from? Where did it emerge?
Oh, it's because, like, what I think is, like, people are complaining that, like, Israeli people stole land from Palestine, something, so they want the land back, and all, like, media and shit.
You know what? I think here's what's going on. Is with the UN being so biased against Israel. A couple of things are going on. Number one, they do get a lot of, your university professors involved. People, celebrities. They give them honorary degrees and all that kind of stuff. And naturally, a lot of these people side much more on the anti-Israel side. So one part of it is their influence on people's opinions, and I'm going to say another part of it is because people's public opinions are generally, again, being influenced by a lot of those same people. With with a lot of these
total side note.
That stuff. Yeah. What?
I was looking for hopefully a more academic source on why they're so anti-Israel, and let's go to why is the UN, and the suggested fill-ins are why is the UN ineffective, bad, failing, useless, irrelevant, not effective, still relevant. So I think that says a lot right there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I think this bias really, it comes from a position of, I guess the public, along with a good number of left-leaning academic sources, really kind of, swaying, I guess you could say, the UN's, opinion or influence towards more of the, anti-Israel side.
Mm-hmm. And then there's the right-wing people like Ben Shapiro that say, literally word for word, say we should just bulldoze the whole place, put a parking lot where the UN is right now instead. It would be much better.
I mean, why not?
Well, see,
why? That's the question that I want a bigger answer to is why.
UN and starting from scratch again.
Yeah. Oh, here is the top 10 insane UN anti-Israel actions. The UN Women's Rights Commission condemned Israel as the world's only violator of women's rights.
The only one in the world?
The world's only violator of women's rights.
Women in Israel can wear skinny jeans and shit. How the fuck is that condemning women?
Oh wait, so if this report that you're putting right here is accurate, the UN has only claimed that the only country not only just in the entire Middle East, but in the entire world that is abusive or discriminatory towards women is Israel.
Yeah, let me read this report just quickly, because this is.
Okay, Israel is a wonderful country. Okay, better than all those fucking shitholes next to Israel.
Yeah, it's true though. I, for one, accept our Jewish overlords.
Yeah. Because the Jewish state is a major obstacle for Palestinian women with regard to their advancement, self-reliance, and integration in the development of their society.
Did you say that?
Wow.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah.
That baffles me.
So the Jewish state is condemned in the resolution for being the major obstacle for Palestinian women with regard to their advancement, self-reliance, and integration in the development of their society.
Totally.
Number one obstacle to Palestinian women is the government of Palestine.
Yeah. Now, aside from all of that, is that this is from the same organization that bullies Ireland for not allowing abortion on demand. and they still are willing to label Israel as the only anti-women's country. Which,
Well, I mean,
considering
the
how much
vast
they hate
majority
Ireland for that,
Europe doesn't do that either, though. Like I don't have a full detailed list of all the European countries in front of me right now, but I know that the general consensus across almost all of Europe is that there should be at least a 17-week cutoff on abortions after 17 weeks.
but
You
Ireland doesn't
can't
allow it at all. Ireland has the 8th Amendment to the Constitution, which recognizes the unborn as valuable human life, and the UN hates them for it.
Well,
And
you
they
can't deny that it's human life because it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's not the debate here. I just bring it up because it's consistently touted as being anti-women.
Fucking feminist, that's the problem.
I mean, no. You can be a
'cause
pro-life
they're
feminist.
marching around and shit. My body, my.
Hey, if
Getting
you
back
want,
to what? Getting back to what you people. Oh man.
Let Zin go.
Oh, okay.
Like our event.
Damn it. All right.
I'll let you go right after. But if you want to hear more about feminism and pro-life feminism to the 5 people watching or so, we do have an event coming up on February 16th where we'll have a bunch of different feminists and an anti-feminist from different perspectives talking about what it means to be a feminist. And I will be there representing the pro-life movement.
Yeah, that's some shame.
Oh, you're still on the panel.
That's right. Is that even real?
I'd like to put an interjection in really quickly that I'd like to keep the discussion academic in nature. I know there's some heated opinions that are going around right now. Just try and keep it somewhat academic. That's all I ask. Anyway, Zin, you were going to say something.
I have a question. I have a heated opinion. Can I say it?
Let Zin go first. I cut her off.
Zin's been waiting.
Okay. All right. Someone messaged me and told me that the anti-Israel thing in the UN, it happened when the UN expanded and let in a bunch of Arab countries and former Soviet countries.
That actually makes a lot of sense.
So you're saying that the anti-Israel bias came from when the United Nations broadened its spectrum to include countries in the Middle East and former Soviet Union countries, is what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what the guy who messaged me said.
Okay. I have no idea what the accuracy of that statement is, but I know that there's a bunch of Arabs and there's I can't English today. I'm so sorry. I do know that there's a lot of Arab countries and that there's a lot of former Soviet Union countries that are in the UN. I'm not prepared to talk about the social condition of all of those countries at the top of my head right now. But...
Well, I can confidently say that y'all don't like Israel.
That you don't like Israel?
No, that Arab countries and former Soviet countries, they all don't like Israel.
I know what the popular narrative against the state of Israel is, but to say that Israel is the only country in the entire globe right now, the only one that is somehow discriminatory towards the women that live in it is that baffles
Plain
me.
retarded?
I don't, regardless of how
language.
Regardless of how anti-Israel that you are, I'm not going to say that opinion is illegitimate, at least not right now, but...
It kind of is, though.
I'm sure that argument could definitely be made, but I don't understand how that makes any sense.
I'm not Israel's biggest fan, and even I think that's dumb.
But yeah,
right. You said
Israel was the only country that voted against this.
Hold on, you said there was a top 10 list on there, right? For in that article.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, keep going down the list. I want to hear the rest of them.
So there's just Israel accusing Israel of apartheid. Attacks on Israel. That's the biggest one. That's the biggest stupid thing I've seen so far. Because this is just for 2017.
Which one? Apartheid?
Yeah.
Okay.
But this list is just anti-Israel actions in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, not all of them are going to be as ridiculous as that one. Oh, the UN World Health Organization singled out Israel as the only violator in the world of mental, physical, and environmental health.
hold up a second. The only violator in the world of
Mental, physical, and environmental health.
and environmental health. Okay, this I'm actually prepared to talk about because I got a midterm for my political what's the word? Political economy of agriculture and food is the name of the course right now. It is vastly untrue. I don't even think Israel's been mentioned in that course yet.
Oh, it's also Israel's fault that Palestinian men beat their wives.
Wait. What?
The
Listen,
UN expert on
Hold on.
violence against women.
I feel very angry today about Israel. Israel is here and it is your fault.
Yeah, but the UN expert on violence against women concluded that when Palestinian men beat their wives, it's Israel's fault.
Oh, they're probably thinking about Israel.
Hold on, can you read that in more detail there? Because I'm actually curious to hear the rationale behind that.
That's a video.
Oh, okay, never mind. We just got another addition to the stream, though. We got George.
Oh.
Hey.
How's it
what's
going,
up?
George?
Good. I actually was
Where's
busy
Kat?
shoveling snow. What's that?
Where's
But
Kat?
why would George know where Katrina is? I don't.
know. But he said there's a new edition. I'm like, yes, someone who will actually like go against what I'm saying.
Okay, I'll
And
go
not
against
just-
what you're saying.
Cool.
Try me, George.
what are you saying?
I'm saying that the UN expert on violence against women concluded that when Palestinian men beat their wives, it's Israel's fault.
Fuck shit.
Oh, well, yeah, I'd agree on you with that. Well,
Habib,
I was going to criticize the UN as well for their human
Who
rights.
wrote that article?
What?
Who wrote that article Maggie's reading?
clearly somebody.
UNWatch.org.
Sorry,
sorry.
say that again?
UNWatch.org.
What the heck?
It's an organization
These people
that-
have like half a brain or what? Where's the other half?
Well, no, this is an anti-UN website that puts together issues that they have with the UN to put it in an easy state to find, so you can be like, yeah, this is why the UN is a piece of trash.
It's Palestinian
For
men
instance-
beat their wives and it's Israel's fault. Wow.
In 2017, the UN General Assembly adopted 20 one-sided resolutions against Israel and only 6 resolutions on the rest of the world combined.
Yeah, actually, the UN, the Israel has a lot more human rights resolutions against it than Saudi Arabia does.
Doesn't my jacket has a...
Like, I don't
I
understand how that can be valid at all. Like, just from the perspective of the most anti-Israel person that is possible, I don't see how you can make a rational argument that somehow Israel is not only worse, but more than what was it? They said 24 and only 6 from all the other countries. That it's almost 4 times as worse as every other country in the Middle East combined.
Oh, yeah, it's just double standard. Honestly, I don't know what you guys were really talking about earlier, but my whole thing is just look at their human rights board and who it has on it. China, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, like a bunch of countries that violate human rights all the time. The only people they can criticize is Israel. Listen, Russia will go into, for instance, during Chechnya, during whatever Russia wants to, they'll level a whole city, turn it into a parking lot. No one says a word. The U.S. kills a few people. All of a sudden, all of the UN goes up against them. It's obviously biased against Western nations, and it always targets the U.S. and Israel.
Who's paying the media to be such assholes?
Okay, let's not get super conspiracy theory here now.
What?
Let's not get super conspiracy theory, she said. But actually, I have something that I'd be interested in hearing your perspective on, George. Because before, I was talking more about the League of Nations, which was it was a global governing body that was much like the UN, but was perpetrated by Woodrow Wilson when he was president from 1912 to 1918. But it was intended as a global governing body that, for the preservation of peace, but also for the spread of democracy globally, and only democratic countries would have been allowed to join the League of Nations. So countries like Saudi Arabia wouldn't be allowed to be on the women's board. They wouldn't be allowed to be in the League of Nations at all. This idea of a global governing body that was originally thought of by Woodrow Wilson is something that I'm more in support of, and I think would be more favorable. What do you think?
I agree with you. I think the whole UN should be torn down, and that the only countries that should have, like, the thing is, what I have a problem with is you have countries that don't, value liberal democratic values. They are like regressive governments that are pointing fingers at the U.S. that are pointing to their countries.
Liberal democratic values.
Oh, if UN was successful, they would have stopped North Korea by now.
When you're dealing with
what I'm saying is
94 countries, chances are that only 40 to 50 of them likely actually believe in liberal democratic values.
No, but like what I mean is, if you don't have countries, like for instance, like it's just you have countries like the U.S. and Western nations that are held at a different standard, and other countries are not, right? So it doesn't make sense for all these countries to all have kind of a say when they're not even up to that standard of, say, the United States or other Western nations. I personally think the whole thing should be shut down, and they can do whatever they want. And the U.S. and Western nations should have their own group, their own organization, and everyone else could just fend for themselves. I really don't care about other countries. They're regressive for a reason. What?
I actually completely agree with that, and I think that if a country would like to join such coalition, I think number one, they're going to have to start moving towards, adjusting their own value system, and number two is that they should really be open to a lot more trade with the West, because that way, through trade, obviously, culture does begin to shift.
Yeah. I take a slightly more moderate stance of that. It's not that I don't care about other countries altogether, but there are certain fundamental human rights that are the footnote of what democracies are supposed to be. And I think a coalition of the governments that, what's the word I'm looking for? But, take in those values as the foundations of their governments and of their nation are better suited to preserve the same values globally as the United Nations is supposed to do, right? They're supposed to preserve and protect fundamental human rights globally.
The thing is, if you look at other countries, I think one big issue with the UN being around, constantly supporting them is that, a couple of things is, first of all, it's doing a few things. First of all, one major thing it's doing is that it's keeping a lot of these countries at a level of dependency, meaning that in order for them to grow and develop, then that means they have to fully depend on the UN. Another thing that's going on there is that because the UN is there providing all these countries food and shelter and all that stuff, it does essentially kill the private market in a lot of these countries. Now, given, yes, if the UN were to leave all these countries now, they would be suffering, but they honestly need to find their own way.
I just think we need to stop pushing democracy. I think that'll go a long way.
I'm just going to take
the best thing according to you.
My 5-level voting system, because God damn it, it's the best idea anyone's ever had.
Khaled, you essentially just want to create an aristocracy to vote on a king.
What?
You just want an aristocracy, essentially.
Hey, that's fine.
Yeah, so why keep it as a democracy? Why not just have an aristocracy with a monarch?
I'll tell you why. Because first of all, I really don't trust monarchs, because you are giving all the power, all the power to one person or one family, and the fate of a country is really put in the hands of what that person believes or what that person values. And I do think people should have a certain say, but the real question comes in on, the right people need to have a say and the smarter people need to have a say. Because I do think that with the right people having a say in how things go on, a country can move forward properly.
But there's nothing stopping the right people.
See, but Alan actually did bring up an objection to that. That, well, I don't think he phrased it in the best way. He does have a point in a sense, is that if we look at your ideas of like land owning, business owning, these are things that for generations were a lot harder for people of color. Like, it's not exclusive to white people by any means, and people of color can get to that point. But because of past laws that targeted people, it would make it harder for an equal representation, which you could say just kind of leaves it in the hands of white people. And the fewer people of color who manage to get themselves into a situation in very few generations that white people did over quite a number of generations.
Well, the thing is, landowning and business owning aren't really the two things. I'll explain it in depth. Is that it's going to consist of 2 points. Now, the number one major point is that, and everybody has the right to do this, is to take a general knowledge test about the running candidates. Now, if people pass that general knowledge test, that's automatically 1 point. And then obviously you have landowning, business owning. Those are 2 other points. And then the fourth and last point is military service. Now, what's going to happen is that everybody, I guess you could say everybody's vote, I guess, could count for a potential of, anywhere between 0 to 4 points. If you fail the knowledge test, none of the other points count. If you pass the knowledge test, well, it totally depends on what you've done and how you've contributed.
But are we talking about the UN or are we talking about electoral systems?
We're talking about 3 different things.
We're just talking about points.
Well, because you keep bringing the League of Nations, which is designed for the horrible purpose of pushing democracy on the world.
Oh.
Well, it's one of the founding principles of it. Yeah, it's like one of 3.
But the other reason was there was consistent war in Europe, and they were hoping that with nations together they could have peace. It would prevent
peace without victory was a fundamental principle that the United States at the time was espousing. But, I mean, it was more directly related to just World War I and the theory that if Britain or if Germany was the sole victor of the war and it wasn't an agreed upon peace treaty at the end of it, it would lead to a fundamental and forever, what's the word I'm looking for? A permanent rivalry between the 2 nations, which would only lead to more war in the future, and we saw that in World War II.
Yeah, when in reality, it was nukes that stopped it.
Nukes stopped World War II. It didn't stop World War I.
No, nukes stopped world wars.
Well, I think a lot of things played a role. Nukes definitely are a big part of it. But I do think that another part of it is countries realizing that they need to work together to an extent, and given that led to the formation of the UN, I think that's a little bit of a drawback. But I think the idea of at least countries that are on the same page as at least forming a coalition makes a lot of sense.
It's actually a good question, actually. Would you say there's less conflict now because of, so for instance, you have a liberal view of conflict and a realist view of conflict, right? And a realist view says that, the only way you have to accumulate power if you want peace, whereas a liberal says that the spread of democracy will eventually create a world peace, right? And would you say right now the reason why we haven't, when you compare us to the early 19th century and stuff, you had in Europe there was consistent fighting. You had the 2 world wars within 20 years of each other and stuff. But now really the only thing you have is little terrorist organizations. In third world countries you have civil wars, but nothing at the large scale that you saw in the 1800s, 1900s, and so on, right? And is that because we've become more democratic worldwide, or is it because you have now a leading world hegemon like the United States, and you have other groups, say, that have nuclear weapons, and no one really is afraid to go to war with everyone's afraid to go to war with each other now because of NATO and certain alliances that if you attack us, that they have the capability of causing a nuclear war.
Well, it's definitely not alliances, because alliances were one of the fundamental problems with why World War I got so big, was a bunch of different alliances.
Yeah, but what's stopping Russia from taking Canada, right? It's the United States. If the United States wasn't there, I'm sure Russia would come and annex us from, you know what I mean? But you get what I'm saying.
I'm not saying that alliances are inherently bad. I'm just saying that alliances aren't the reason we haven't had mass-scale world war. Because alliances can lead to mass-scale world war.
Alliance is essentially what led to World War I, if I'm not mistaken.
It did, but then you look at the Cold War, and it kind of prevented it at the same time, right?
Yeah.
Because if Western Europe wasn't an alliance with the United States, and you didn't have the Article, or what was it, Article 5, I think, or it's where if one nation, it's in par NATO, I think it's NATO Article 5, in which if one nation is attacked, all nations have to stand up and defend it, that are part of NATO. So that kind of prevented, I would say, a Cold War on top of that, you have nuclear weapons, and that also I feel was a deterrent. But
And also,
I think it depends on the. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, the very popular theory, I've heard about this in nearly every political science class that I've taken, is that democracies generally tend not to go to war with other democracies. And since the Cold War, there's been a vast spreading of democracy throughout the entire planet. Look, pre-Cold War period and post-Cold War period, the difference is astounding.
Yeah, well, that was my whole point. Is that do you say that, like, because that would be a liberal perspective on conflict, is that, yeah, like you said, the spread of democracy will prevent future conflicts. And do you believe that currently right now it's because of that, or could you go from the realist perspective, is that nations have so much power now to destroy the world that's the reason why we're not in conflict?
I honestly think it all plays a role in a way. I think both schools kind of have a point on why there hasn't been any big mass scale conflict in a while. I think it's perhaps because of what had happened with these wars, there's an opportunity to actually build a more peaceful future. Meanwhile, there's also at the back of people's head the idea that if we do get into conflict, the stakes are gonna be much, much higher, and it's gonna be much, much worse. So I do think both play a role.
No, it can be perfectly true that our global values have changed, and at the same time true that the consequences would also be too high if it didn't change.
Yep. And I also think another thing that played a role that I nobody really touched on is the increase of trade between countries.
Well, yeah. Well, that's what the whole European Union, the point of it was. It started off as the steel and coal, what was it, the ECC or something, or I forget. It was the European Steel and Coal Organization. Yeah. And that's where the European Union, if Germany and France industries were so intertwined that they wouldn't be able to go to war with each other. And now, because of globalism, you have that, right? So that is another variable in why I think conflict has decreased.
Well, that was actually a key strategy of the United States in the Cold War, was they would only give food aid and trade with food with countries that weren't part of the Soviet Union. I can't remember who it was, but there was an advisor in the United States that nothing would kill the Soviet Union more than a lack of food, right? So they used their trade as a weapon against the Soviet Union, and that proved vastly successful and doing great harm to the Soviet Union without any armed conflict at all, just with trade with other democracies.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the Soviets also traded their food for weapons.
I want to get a little deeper into democratic peace theory, especially if you're a country looking for a trade partner, you're much more likely to do trade with, say, especially that I'm not talking about availability of resources, actually, but in general, but it's more of who your trading partner is. Generally speaking, if your trading partner shares similar values to yours, you're more likely to trade with that person, and more likely get involved in even more trade with the person. So I think, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, trade is an incredibly complex issue, depending on, especially in agriculture, but in almost any field. There's structural problems that have been going on almost since the 1800s in some areas, but mainly throughout like the 40s and the 50s and the post-World War II area. That's all. We could have a whole other discussion just on that, I think. It's super complex. Yeah, go ahead, Maggie.
Yeah, I'm actually reading some criticisms of the democracies don't war with each other theory. A big one being that World War II was a war between democracies because Hitler was actually elected.
Yeah, but Hitler changed. Well, is my audio on? Oh, it is. Well, yeah, Hitler did get elected democratically, and they had a constitution, but he tore it up pretty much and initiated martial law, which kind of nullified it. So
doesn't I guess make it not a democracy.
Well, could you consider Nazi Germany a democracy, though?
Is that Hitler was voted in?
Well, yeah, but he wasn't. Yeah, but like he
did right now too. Would you say Russia is the ideal form of democracy?
Well, I mean, there is no ideal form of democracy.
Have you seen the meme candidates for Russian election?
I'm sorry, it's not the definition of democracy is something that isn't agreed upon by experts right now. Even there's a debate to be had right now about whether Russia is or is not a democracy. But is there a debate about whether or not the United States is a democracy? No, because we all know that it is. No, there's not. No serious
No,
debate.
it's not.
No serious
not
controversy there.
college prohibit.
Then
I mean,
US.
actually, just to say something, the United States isn't a democracy; it's a constitutional republic.
Well, it's a constitutional republic, but it's still
Yeah, it is. It is, but not in the purest sense. Because if you're gonna look at purely democracy, then that's just mob rule, right? So there has to be checks and balances.
Democracy is a mess.
Yeah, but the Electoral College prevents the U.S. from ever being properly called a democracy.
There's different forms of democracy too, like George said, mob rule or whatever. But it's about representation by that sense, right? There's people representing people, and there's people electing official representatives to represent them on behalf of them, right?
And you're right. And you can go even further and say, okay, look at our system here in Canada. You have first past the post, which people say is not democratic. That Canada should adopt a proportional representational system, in which most democracies have, in which depending on the percentage a party gets determines how many seats they get in parliament. Whereas in our system, you could win majority government with say 33% of the vote, even though most of the country is not for you, right? So is that really a democracy, right? So there is, I guess, you could have a debate to a varying degree and use a word I hate using, but it's a very nuanced type of topic. So
it's very clear that there's some countries that espouse more democratic values than others, right?
Well, yeah, no, for sure.
That's the point that I was trying to get at.
Like Iran. Iran is a prime example.
The structural differences of governments in different democratic nations.
Yeah, well, look at Iran. Iran is a perfect example. They have elections. They have a government. You can vote for people, right? If you just write it down on a piece of paper, that looks like a democracy, but is it? No, right? So I would say if you want to look at how there's fake democracies, Iran is the perfect example.
Russia
even more than I would.
Or Nazi Germany, maybe.
Or
Nazi Germany, maybe.
Well, no, Nazi. You would never even think of it as a democracy because it. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I don't know.
Alan?
Yeah, we're getting a lot of feedback from your end, Alan.
What?
Alan, if you're not talking, mute it. There's a lot of feedback from a lot of.
There's something going on in the background on your end that we were getting feedback from.
He does live with a bunch of Punjabis, so.
I don't know. I mean, it's almost 10 o'clock though, and I think we've covered a lot of stuff even outside of the UN. We got off topic a lot. I think it's about time we wrap it up. Yeah.
Katrina only got home 10 minutes ago.
I got to study for my midterm tomorrow. I don't want to go past 10.
Yeah, and I'm using up data right now. My Wi-Fi for some reason is not working, so I'm gonna talk to you guys later. But it was nice.
All right, well, we'll go through everyone first and let them have their quick say if you don't mind sticking around, or I can let you go first if you're using up data.
Yeah. Well, I kind of already said. I think it'd be redundant. I would just be saying what I said because I've only been here for 10 minutes.
Okay. That's all right.
Yeah.
All right, well, I guess we'll see you around then, George.
All right, see ya. Take care, guys.
All right.
What about everyone else? Do you want to give a final say, or do you want to just close the curtain?
I think
I'm just gonna close the curtain.
Give the final say.
All right, final say. Who
How
wants
about
to start?
this? If you want to give a final say, you can. How about that?
All right, I'm just gonna leave.
All right, I know some problems then.
All right, who's going first?
I guess Alan is because he's furthest to the left on my screen.
Well, I'd say I honestly don't know what to say.
Just closing thoughts on everything we discussed.
Yeah, starting off and how we on the topics we discussed. I think government should not interfere too much into the lives of parents and their family, and Israel is not to be blamed because it's just a bunch of bullshit from the media and stuff. And Palestinian women getting beaten up is not Israel's fault. What are the other things we discussed? Russia is sort of a dictatorship according to me because Putin's always winning. Putin's always winning. He's been winning ever since I was like in grade 5 or 6. Like this guy, like, isn't there a law in a democracy or something that says a guy cannot rule for more than 2 terms or something?
No,
That's the US.
no, that's only the United States.
Oh, okay, then this guy is just like, he's like, according to me, he's a virtual dictator. And the next thing we discussed after that was what did we discuss?
Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull.
I mean, we might as well have.
discussed that.
Oh, it's fine. You don't have to get every little individual thing. Just some more broader thoughts of what you took away from it is fine.
I'd say global governance would. I don't think it like really work. I think it's better if like all countries are just like by themselves and like just get along well with each other, and you have like good trade, and all countries depend on each other for resources, so they won't like get into war with each other. But all countries are left to like be themselves. That would be better.
I got you. All right, thank you, Alan. Khaled, do you want to go or no?
Yeah, I may as well. I just want to say that Indiana Jones and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was it gets a lot of hate. Okay, seriously though.
I mean, it's just an average action flick with Harrison Ford in it. I don't think it deserved the hate that it got.
Yeah,
it got a lot of
It's a
unnecessary.
decent popcorn movie.
But
And
yeah,
that, people, is what really grinds my gears.
okay, so okay, this opinion has nothing to do with Indiana Jones. Basically, I think the UN as an organization has screwed up in a lot of ways. I think as an organization, it's shown to be pretty corrupt. It's shown to be looking out for its own interests rather than the interests of all the countries involved. But I like the idea of an international coalition. The way I'd handle that is through countries that essentially share the values. In the West case, obviously, Western countries do share the same values, and I do think that these coalitions really should mainly focus on military associations and trade.
Trade is
Okay.
important.
Well, thank you, Khaled. Maggie, do you have any thoughts?
Democracy is trash. The UN is trash. Trash it all. But really, going with the League of Nations model, you either have democracies in it or not, and as soon as you give it the power to define what exactly a democracy is, you create an exclusive club that just means that you try to have countries throw away their own values, try and join your exclusive club to get the trade benefits or whatever shit you're throwing at them for abandoning what makes their values their values.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying the Middle East
can have some.
UN doesn't sound like a terrible idea.
Well, there are some countries that you might be like, yeah, that's a great idea. Poland or Ireland are countries that have strong values that have withstood the UN and its moral bankruptcy, and are absolutely amazing countries. But would one be better served with a monarch? But I'm digressing. But
okay, thank you, Maggie. I'll give
the
my
idea of government, what is and is not morally correct, and can force you into their own moral bankruptcy, is absolutely detestable and should not be encouraged. Screw the UN.
Oh, okay, thank you. Oh, I think Maggie, or it's in just, never mind. I'll give my closing thoughts real quick and then we'll wrap it up. I think Maggie did say some relevant things in regards to the idea of the League of Nations being a governing body to promote democracy, but I do believe that there's such thing as objective moral rights and objective, morality. Some things are just genuine. There's certain rights that should be bestowed on people as our natural given rights from God, right? And I think when Woodrow Wilson was saying that he wants it to be comprised of democratic nations, it should instead have said countries that comprised that practice that set of pursuing those fundamental values to their people, right? So the United Nations is founded on the idea that we have to preserve these fundamental human rights globally, right? You should comprise your body of governance with countries that actively participates in doing that for its people, right? Comprising it with countries that don't do that makes no sense to me, because how can those countries? It's like there's this a line from the Bible that says, how can you claim to criticize the splinter in your neighbor's eye when there's a wooden beam coming out of your own, right? That's kind of what the UN is for me right now. And I think before that they go criticizing the splinters.
Sure, there wouldn't be.
And I think before the UN goes, or countries that are within the UN go and start criticizing the splinters in other people's eyes, they need to first remove the wooden beam that's in their own first before they can hope to be effective at doing what they claim to do. That's my closing thoughts on that.
Now, don't get me wrong, I do believe in absolute morality.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that you don't. I'm rephrasing it from being, instead of defending democracy, just defending those objective moral rights that should be bestowed on people. So just rephrasing it a little bit.
There is objective truth and objective morality. I just don't think world government is ever going to be capable, until the second coming of Christ, is ever going to be capable of actually being moral.
Trade and military, guys. Just trade and military.
Oh, well, thanks for clearing that up. That's why I just wanted to clear up mine really quickly, too. Thanks to everyone else who already left the stream and contributed to the discussion, too.
You're welcome.
We'll see you next week when I maybe turn on my camera so you can see my face. We'll see.
We're going to make a whole event out of that, by the way.
Yeah. Will I not? You'll have to tune in next time to find out.
Dun, dun, dun.
And don't forget about the feminist panel coming up on February 16th.
That's
Same
right.
Advertising.
All right. I'll see you guys next week.
All right.
All right.